After quietly lying on the ground for more than an hour, Yang Kai stood up, although he had just used up all his strength. An hour before, Yang Kai felt it was like a dream. He really could not believe this was true. Quietly he punched himself and felt the pain. In the end, what was it? I wonder what history this black book has. He muttered to himself in helplessness. Waiting until his heart stopped beating, he suddenly found himself somewhat different from before. For he couldn't eat 3 fulfilling meals a day, and every 5 days he would suffer beatings. Thus his body bones are weak, but now he clearly perceived that his bones were full of vitality. A surge of energy, filled with warmth, slowly circulated inside and outside his body. Moving slightly, the bones burst out a crystal-clear sound, making it seem like a melody being played. And Yang Kai, who was hurt today, couldn't feel that pain anymore. Aware of this, Yang Kai quickly rolled up his sleeves and opened his clothes. Looking closely, he found that his body no longer had any bruises and injuries. They had all disappeared. Even those old wounds were healed. He felt as unblemished as a newborn baby. Rubbing the places that previously held wounds, dead skin fell. This revealed the new tender skin underneath, like a baby's but far healthier. I cry. He swallowed down a cold lump. Thinking of that golden skeleton in his body had such strong recovery ability. Then feeling his own strength and found that he was still at the tempered body 3rd stage did no change. This discovery somewhat made him a little disappointed. Rivers and illusions, with secrets known only to insiders. This type of story Yang Kai heard much during his childhood. He knew in world there are many men eligible to jump past the Dragon Gate, becoming powerful and famous. But after all, it's just a story. How many people can really be happy and gain such luck and results in this world? Those senior experts with greater strength, the more I could not bear to lower themselves with earth and buried. Always finding inheritor before death. I want to jump off a cliff, drill a cave and encounter events. Such unlikely things will happen? But the current problem had happened to him. That black book must have had some great background, and that golden skeleton must be extraordinary. This can be said as his good fortune. It could also be said as fate. The 4 sentences on the black book's first page: proud gold body, rules the fence, indomitable spirit, will it descend. If he didn't pick up the black book, but another picked it up, they too will treat it as garbage. Unable to prise open like Mount Tai. Precisely because he picked it up, and used it as a pillow for a year, it felt his body's unyielding and tough nature. Unlocking the secrets of Black Book today. In other words, this thing really is his first encounter, but it's the first achievement that he obtained through his own hands. Thinking of this, Yang Kai suddenly burst out in comfort. That black book. Thinking of it suddenly, this book that was his pillow for over a year. He wasn't anxious to find out what it was nor how he found it. Between being anxious, and somewhat weakened in the body, the black book abruptly appeared in front of Yang Kai, and snapped shut, falling to the ground. He was stunned. Picking up the book, he furrowed his eyebrows while thinking hard. Struck by with an idea, a move from his hands, the book disappeared. And a further move made it appear again. This scene was like a magic trick. One could see that Yang Kai's face was very solemn, because he truly felt that the black book could escape into his body with a single thought. This black book, could it possibly be made from a soul stone? After saying it, he nearly gave himself a fright. Soul stone. This was considered a legendary gem. Only when hundreds of millions of ghosts gather in the abyss, and with the help of vast amounts of human vitality, will it start to form. Rumor has it that this is how it was formed. Inside the black stone, with misery of 100 million lives, the living cannot enter, and green grass can only hope they can grow on it. Those words were somewhat exaggerated. But for a soul stone about 3.5 centimeters x 3.5 centimeters to form, how many lives must be taken? The formation of this mythical rock was really cruel and bloody. What every life near it during its creation will be dead within milliseconds. Also, the formation time is unimaginable. It could add up to a millennium or even 10 millenniums. Putting the formation process aside, this soulstone can be considered a supreme treasure. That is because it has a very unique ability, for it can be melded with one's body and also open up a dimension. This space is quite flexible. Storing things will be no hassle. Even though Yang Kai is only a trial disciple, a humble position, his experiences were not lacking. Not to mention, the story of the legendary soulstone has been around many years. Anyone would know the story. When he just obtained this black book, he didn't think about this. Thinking about how the books went into his body, he thought about how the gold skeleton came out from the book. How could he not recognize the book's material? He immediately started sweating. Soulstones were the things of legends, long extinct in the world. He didn't think that he will be able to encounter one, let alone such a large one. The legends only talked about 3.5 centimeters x 3.5 centimeters sized soulstones, for it was only found that large. Even at that size, it was priceless. But the only in front of him was somehow made into a black book that was 30 x 7 centimeters. Its value was immeasurable. If this news were to spread out, even if it's the entire Han dynasty, not mention a mere martial school, they will probably be crushed overnight to obtain it. Yang Kai couldn't help but feel his hands heat up. This heart had not forgotten the terror, but luckily it could be taken into his body. Otherwise he would be in great danger. His body hiding this treasure, he swiftly escaped back into his hut. He dared not to be carelessly, while his heart beated madly. He was becoming more and more excited, whilst also becoming more and more uneasy. His strength was currently too low, so how could he guard this treasure? Even though the black book could be taken into his body, eliminating chances of being discovered. This didn't lessen the worry in his heart. Only practice, only the strong will be able to protect what is theirs. Thinking about what happened 3 years ago, Yang Kai's eyes gradually calmed down. All on his, without any support he came to this school. What is not for practice and strength? Even though he obtained this book, he took it into his hands. On the first page was the proud golden body. Even though he didn't know what use it had, it couldn't be useless. This book also had so many pages. It couldn't only possess this one golden skeleton. Although Yang Kai was only 15 this year, due to his experiences these past 3 years, he is far more mature than his peers. It is also because of this, that he forged this unyielding character. So when he calmed down, sitting on his bed he carefully started to read the first page. After confirming there were no extra things popping out of the first page, he started to read the second page. With his previous experiences, his actions seemed more natural and knowledgeable. And then Yang Kai's eyes slowly widened as golden words emerged on the dark page's proud golden body, tempered body record. Previously his mood had dropped but now it soared. Sure enough, as he suspected, every page had something hidden almost without thinking. Yang Kai's entire mind was focused on the second page of the book. Abruptly, the golden characters flew off the pages like a fish and swiftly drilled themselves in Yang Kai's brain. The glow enveloped the darkness around him and then disappeared. After it was gone, he felt as if his brain had gained new information. This had all come from the golden characters. Calming his heart, Yang Kai closed his eyes and began to digest the information. In fact, he didn't need to digest and absorb the information. For when the characters imprinted themselves into his brain, he was already able to comprehend their meaning with ease. A full mastery in another sense. This is a tempered body record. Yang Kai muttered, for he found that it was a fist technique. Though it may seem simple, in reality it was not. In order to perform it, there were strict requirements. For it is extremely ordered to cultivate it, you must be facing the rising sun, in the east, to learn it. So at most, you could only practice for half an hour a day. Currently it was night, so he had to wait at least 5-6 hours to start. This frustrated Yang Kai, for he had exerted himself all day and only ate one measly sweet potato. Nonetheless, he had obtained the priceless treasure, and was jubilant. After trying to sleep for half an hour, he decided to analyze the third page of the black book. But it just let him down. No matter how much he checked and flipped, there were no changes to the page. While doing this, he fell asleep. When Yang Kai then woke up, it was nearly sunrise. The pre-dawn darkness was clouded and stillness covered the whole area, with the occasional insect and bird noises. With his heart looking forward to what was going to happen, Yang Kai quickly leapt out of bed, and went to the front of the cabin. Standing there, he took a few deep breaths and let his body slowly relax. A touch of gray dawn appeared, as he opened his eyes. The set of instructions on the fist technique was practiced hundreds of times. His hands shaped into a palm, with a gentle, slow movement, pushing to the left, to the right, pushing forward. Embracing the world in his mind, everything in between the palm, the vast land, even the air covering the moon and stars. Left foot forward, right next to the horizon, the right foot stepped powerfully like the king of the underworld. Between breaths, the world was full of vitality, like spring flowers blooming. The autumn wind blew, like a golden message. Then the cold wind whistled by, signaling the coming of snow, ice, cold snow. Yang Kai's look gradually deepened. Slowly his fists pressed on the hefty rocks. In any case, the rock didn't hint at opening any time soon. With a burst of sound, Yang Kai with a pale face, suddenly staggered, nearly fell to his knees. While exercising countless times in his mind, he discovered that this art was an absolute fist. Yang Kai never expected this record actually contained such mysterious tempering body technique. For just that short while, Yang Kai felt that the entire world was weighing on his shoulders. But he also felt that he could sense all things in the world, under this pressure. This tempering body technique was not the practice of fist techniques. It was the practice of worldly transformation and the fate of the world. This practice was full of ups and downs, joys and sorrows. A slow punch and kick in could affect the power of heaven and earth, but also was full of secret rules. When he launched 6 palms, it took 3 steps. This result wasn't even 1% of the result recorded in the book. Just that had been difficult to sustain. Then a crack emitted from his spine, making him believe that he broke his spine. He quickly inspected it, but only found that his back was in some pain. It wasn't anything big. Steeling his mind, Yang Kai once again started to practice according to the tempered body record. Because he wasn't psychologically prepared, Yang Kai's mind was in a trance. Feeling unclear, he held his breath to regain a clear mind. Accompanied by a slow dance of his fists, Yang Kai once again felt his mind had become clear and regained the atmosphere required to continue. Then his body emitted several indistinct feelings. Yang Kai was uncertain as to what they were. Not only that, with the routine deployment, his fist was actually getting heavier, like being at the bottom of the ocean. With more hardships, there were more improvements. Cockeye could be heard. Yang Kai's every action made his bones explode like firecrackers. Excruciating pain permeated throughout his body, but he was unmoved. His tenacity at this moment vividly appeared. In the blink of an eye, Yang Kai felt his hands and feet tremble like they were beaten to pulp. It was like heaven and earth both imposed themselves on his body. Persisting, he didn't falter. Suddenly warmth surged, alleviating the pain within his body in this moment. Spirits lifted, he restarted practice. He knew that this must have been due to the integration of the golden skeleton. After all, both of these things came from the same place. In front the sun rising, near a cabin in a remote place of the school stood a sweating young man. Diligently practicing, slow fists and discovering his future. Half an hour passed when Yang Kai suddenly felt light. He no longer felt the heavy pressure on his body. Right at this moment, he could no longer continue in cultivating this skill. The record was very clear: you could only cultivate for half an hour every day at sunrise. His efforts seemed to have drained him. Thus Yang Kai fell to the ground in a heap and took a deep breath. A surge of purple gas accompanied his breath and disappeared. In an instant, he felt refreshed and energized. Looking distracted, he couldn't help but be shocked. Atmosphere sense. He had already developed a sense to the atmosphere. That is to say, he had broken through the tempered body 3rd stage and was entering the 4th stage. This news made him elated. Since entering High Heaven Pavilion, it took 3 years of practicing to reach the tempered body 3rd stage. But, after 30 minutes of practicing, the mysterious quenching body technique had allowed him to break through and enter the 4th stage. The tempered body boundary had 9 stages. Until the 3rd stage, it really just enhanced one's physical capabilities. But after the 4th stage, it would generate a presence within the meridians. Only with the birth of atmosphere sense are you considered a true cultivator. Although at this time you will have the atmosphere sense, the body will still have no real strength. You could only wait for the 7th stage, where the body will develop its own strength, all the way until the 9th stage. That is when the body breaks through and creates a door to strength to the initial element stage. Only then will you truly have strength. Initial element stage is a cultivator's true start. Everything in the tempered body boundary was just laying the foundations for the future of the initial element boundary. This foundation was not finalized, like with a man's strength. For your bones, skin would grow continuously, until you reach the peak. Yang Kai had just having entered the 4th stage, and obtained atmosphere sense. To outsiders, this may not seem like much, but to him it was amazing news and progress. Half an hour after he broke through, the results of quenching body record were evident. Although his own knowledge contributed, if not for that technique, he believed that he needed another 3-4 months before advancing. With this, he breathed in deeply and exhaled out the impurities in his body. From within his mouth, out came a pitch-black smoke. Filthy, as it tumbled to the ground. After expectorating this smoke out, his 6 senses all became more acute and sharpened. Urza, he's been possessed by a demon. Senses, sound, touch, sight, taste, smell and 6th sense. Was this his body's impurity? Yang Kai shook on the spot. With the practice of cultivation you will reduce and drain the body of impurities each time. Yang Kai previously had experienced this, but never at this level. Numerous ideas and joy lingered in his mind. Although he had successfully entered the 4th stage, he had made no real progress in the tempered body record's fist technique. His daily practice could only produce 1% of the total result, out of the 101 punches. Urza, saying that have patience and results will come. If you rush you will miss things. Thinking for a while, Yang Kai planned a bit of his future. Even though it wasn't thorough, he could no longer be like how he had been, taking each step as it came. For after a while, you couldn't help but become impatient. Then after eating something he continued to sweep the area. Although he was a sweeper, it didn't mean that he needed to sweep the entire school. He was only responsible for 1/10 of the school. Even though it was cumbersome, it would only take an hour or so. Within the trees, Zia Ningchang had started to monitor the disciples and inadvertently saw Yang Kai sweeping away. To not have some emotions would be weird. Today, there was something different about him, but she wasn't sure. For over half an hour, he hadn't left that spot, sweeping it until it was shiny and spotless. It was so slick that if a mosquito were to go on, it would have a sprained ankle. Urza, trying to express how clean it is. This author has a major issue with mosquitoes, I say. Zia Ningchang didn't know what to do with him. At that moment, Yang Kai was thinking about other things. Yesterday he had obtained a huge opportunity, so naturally he was considering his future. But no real options were found. He could only continue to practice at sunrise every day, for now. While he was pondering, rapid footsteps approached quickly from behind. He quickly went to dodge, but didn't realize that the other party was making preparations to avoid him too. So they crashed into each other. Though he didn't sustain any major injuries, when he crashed into that person, it felt as if he had crashed into a steel wall. With a cry, he fell to the ground and the place he bumped felt numb. Yang Kai quickly recovered and apologetically asked, "This fellow disciple, are you okay?" The young man was annoyed, and when he looked up to see that it was Yang Kai, whose explosive anger dissipated. Holding anger for such person held no meaning, and it was also his own fault. Replying immediately while waving his hands, "It's all right, it's all right." While saying this and getting up, he then energetically ran away. Yang Kai asked, "Fellow disciple, where are you going to so hurriedly?" The young man faintly shouted, "The contribution hall, where else?" Listening to his words, Yang Kai realized that today was already the 8th day of the month. It was the day where the main gate distributed last month's contribution points. So every month of this day, the contribution hall would be crowded with disciples flocking to collect their points. With these points they could exchange them for various cultivation pills, treasures and martial arts to improve their strength. So this day made all disciples all excited. Some were excited, while others disappointed. Yang Kai was of the latter. Startled, he couldn't help but frown. Each month, the amount of points he received was quite meager. Sweepers could earn 10 points, but in the last month he was challenged 6 times, and each time he lost. With reductions after each loss, he was only left with 4 points. This really made people cry. Fortunately he was only a trial disciple. His status was the lowest, so if he lost, he would only lose 1 point. Ordinary disciples lost 2. Thinking of this, Yang Kai was thankful. But even a small mosquito has flesh. And with his savings, he will one day earn enough to exchange them for something worthwhile. There had been enough delay today, he thought as he continued to sweep. When he had finally finished the job, it was noon. Time to go to the hall to collect his points. After the morning's bustle, the hall was now deserted and quiet. Thankfully he hadn't come in the morning, or the wait would have been too troublesome. Waltzing into the hall, you could clearly see an old man dozing away. This old man was the treasurer of the sect. He was about 50 with thin white hair and a kind face. Looking at him, he looked harmless to animals and humans, but Yang Kai knew he was a sly fox. There was once an elite disciple who dared to act arrogant here and was then pushed out of the hall a few hundred feet. His life was almost taken. Yang Kai was present, so he knew this and also knew that his old man held unfathomable strength. Stepping into the view of the old man, Yang Kai could clearly see the old man snoring away. Holding a broom, he gently nudged the old man while softly calling, "Treasurer Meng." The old man's surname was Meng. His first name Yang Kai didn't know, so he couldn't call him that. Tapping the counter a few times, the old man was finally awoken. He groggily opened up his eyes and saw that it was Yang Kai. Wrinkling his face as if he saw shit. "What's with that face?" Yang Kai asked indignantly. Rolling his eyes, "Why didn't you come in the morning?" Confidently he replied, "There were too many people in the morning, and currently it's peaceful." Interrupting this old man's rest. "Do you know what respecting the elderly means?" Leaning in, Yang Kai whispered, "Which young lady did you dream of?" Suddenly full of energy, Treasurer Meng replied to Yang Kai with eyes full of contempt and loudly proclaimed, "Your words just now tarnished this old man's reputation. Too outrageous. Good body figure? Great!" Treasurer Meng unconsciously leaked out. "Supple legs, white skin and a beautiful, thin waist? N. Immediately he nodded his head, immediately thinking Yang Kai as a friend. He. Yang Kai sneered. Treasurer Meng stammered and blushed as bright as a monkey's ass. Full of shame, he just wanted to dig a hole and crawl inside to hide. Throughout his years in High Heaven Pavilion, the only person Yang Kai really knew was Treasurer Meng. After all, he needed to go to him every month. Treasurer Meng had a nickname which most people referred to him as Bully Meng. Even though his position is a treasurer, he still liked to extort contribution points from other disciples. Take blood clotting cream for example, usually it would be sold around 10 contribution points. He will sell 2 bottles for the price of 3. Also the amount of cream that should go in 2 bottles, was put into 3. "It's very simple," he said, "buy it or get lost." Of course Treasurer Meng doesn't always do it, only occasionally. He only targets richer disciples. For poor people like Yang Kai he doesn't even bother. Contribution points are hard to come by, so how can disciples stand by and be exploited? Every disciple that had been cheated by him would report him to the Elders' Council. They have warned him numerous times, but he still continued, and moved. Furthermore, his position is crucial, and there was no one who could replace him. Due to this, all of the sect's disciples hated him to the utmost limit. That old man was ruthless to everybody, except Yang Kai, to whom he could do nothing. That was because one time, he was peeking at a female disciple, and was caught red-handed by him. No respect for the elderly. What a scandal. He was caught, so Treasurer Meng could only lower his head in front of Yang Kai. It was exactly because of this that Yang Kai became very familiar with the old man. The lecherous old man, with thick skin, quickly adjusted his attitude and said, "Same as always?" "Yeah," Yang Kai said earnestly while nodding his head. Not saying a word, Treasurer Meng took out $10 from within the counter and recorded it down. Taking the silvers, he asked, "How many contribution points do I have now?" Rolling his eyes, the treasurer replied, "You earn 4 points each month and then use 1 point to exchange for $10. That leaves you with only 3 points to save, making a total of 12 points in your account. What, you want to exchange them for a bottle of blood clotting cream?" "No, I was just asking," he replied while muttering, 12 eh? Such a small amount, even if you just wanted to exchange it for a small medicinal herb, it wouldn't even be enough." With a serious face, Treasurer Meng whispered to him, "Little Yang Kai, you want to save up and exchange it for a tempered essence pellet. But to save up for it, and then to rank up with your speed, how long will that take?" Won't I eventually reach it? He replied, chuckling. This left Treasurer Meng speechless. He thought that with his speed, by the time he makes it, this old man will have already been dead for many years. But Treasurer Meng, there is one thing I don't understand. Speak. The old man said while putting on I am in a good mood, so I will tell you attitude. The tempered essence pill is a very precious medicine, how could it appear here? He. Speaking with a proud face, that is because this pellet is this old man's treasure, others don't know about it. Ah, it's yours? This left Yang Kai stunned. He had always thought that this pellet belonged to the school. No wonder this old thing's at such an astronomical price. Now don't be angry, he joyfully said, while taking a drink from the teapot. I won't bully you, as long as you bring enough contribution points to exchange, old Meng will give it to you. For my word is not nothing. I will collect it, he said, nodding. With his face downcast, old Meng asked Yang Kai, I heard that yesterday you got a beating? Immediately Yang Kai turned around and left. From behind, Treasurer Meng shouted, let this old man ask, don't be in such a hurry to walk away. He said, but really he was gloating inside. Seeing that Yang Kai had no intention to stop, he straightened up and yelled, little Yang Kai, you should hurry up and leave. High Heaven Pavilion is no place for you to be, sooner rather than later you will be killed. Pausing but without turning around, Yang Kai sighed, I have no place to return to. He was finished if he left. After holding the teapot for a while, Treasurer Meng said, then why did you come? Tempered essence pill. He, this expensive treasure, how could this old man possibly own it? He only made up this lie to give you hope, he had never thought you would take it seriously. Yang Kai then hurriedly went back to his hut and put the broom away, then briskly walked out. He was going to the small village outside of Tanglin to buy his food with his $10, like he did every month. For the first time this trip didn't make him feel tired. Previously, every time he walked down this path, he would get bad asthma attacks again and again. But this time, not only did this not happen, his body felt strengthened compared to before, felt less strained walking down the path. Even if he walked 100 miles, he felt that he wouldn't tire. Is it the golden skeleton? This made him think of something that happened this morning. While he was sweeping, another disciple had crashed into him, but on the contrary to what normally occurred, he had held his ground very stably, while the disciple had fell to the ground. Although this wasn't much, in retrospect, it was unusual. With his weak physique, how could he not have fallen, but the other party fell? It had always been him who fell. Growing more and more excited, he thought about the changes the golden skeleton had brought to his body. Although these changes were small, gradually over the course of time they could culminate into great changes. Thinking of this, Yang Kai recovered and soon walked to town. Looking around, he went to the left-hand side of the street. He was going to a rice shop. The shop wasn't big and the owner is surnamed He, and was a local resident. He treated all customers the same. This was one of the reasons why Yang Kai bought from him. Such a small store could be found everywhere. The reason why Black Plum Village was very busy, was because in the surrounding area, apart them there was not only High Heaven Pavilion, but also the Windy Rain sect. The relationship between the two could not be considered bad. The various other small sects couldn't compare to these two main sects, for they didn't even own their own land. It was precisely because of these two main sects that the village was able to sell many different weapons and maintain such a bustling environment full of many different wares, creating an environment just like the Han Dynasty's capital. After walking around for a while, Yang Kai inadvertently walked past an alley where some people were gathered. He didn't know what they were doing, but they were pretty suspicious and gave Yang Kai an extremely vicious glare. Chuckling lightly, he just followed the principle, if they don't harm me, I won't harm them. He just ignored them. But among those three there was one who dressed in a similar fashion to Yang Kai. Yang Kai didn't think much of this though, because they were in Black Plum Village, located close to High Heaven Pavilion. The sight of other disciples coming down to the village was quite common. A little while ago, Yang Kai arrived at the line for rice. The line was quite long, the length of 2 stalls. The business was very prosperous, but only has one waiter running around serving. The boss was calculating about money on an abacus at the counter, while the wife greeted the guests. As more people finished ordering, the line gradually became shorter and Yang Kai joined the line. "Madam," Yang Kai cried out, A 40-year-old looking lady looked up to see who it was. When she saw it was Yang Kai, she suddenly smiled and said, "Ah, young man, you came to buy rice again." "Yes." He walked to the front of the counter, and pointed a bag behind the counter and said, "Give me one bag please." While the lady was tying up the bag with a string, she said, "Young man, you buy just one bag a month, is this enough for you?" Yang Kai replied, "It's enough." "You liar." The lady retorted while looking at Yang Kai, "Look at you. Such thin arms and legs. If you're eating properly, then why are your arms and legs so thin?" Yang Kai smiled sheepishly. "I also go to the mountains to hunt, so therefore even with just one bag I won't be hungry." While the boss concentrated on calculating the bill, he whispered to her, "Go fetch the old rice from the back and give it to this child. We'll listen to the boss." Madam replied with a smile. "How is this right? You are also trying to make a living here," Yang Kai said out loudly. The lady immediately frowned her face. "What use is old rice? Leaving it there will only provide a place for insects to grow. Anyways, people won't eat it." But the owner said that this rice still has some nutrients, although less. "You wait here, I will go get some for you take home." As she was saying this, she had already started walking towards the back room. Yang Kai's heart swelled, for he did not know what to say. Every time he came to buy rice, the boss and his wife would always find various excuses to give him more. They say that insects will grow in old rice and the like, but in fact, it was always good rice they gave him, not old rice. Their generosity gave Yang Kai hope in this sad world. "Thank you, Uncle He." Yang Kai's voice had a slight trembling to it. The boss smiled and looked up. "When living alone, don't you have household problems? In the future, whenever you're hungry, just come to our shop. We may not have much, but we still have enough rice for you to eat." "Okay." Yang Kai nodded his head. This world still had good people around. Shortly, two enthusiastic people came to the rice store and kicked some people who were ready to order their meals from the line and away from the storefront. Ah! The second brother fell, landed on his butt, and flipped over. It was a big problem because after he fell to the ground he couldn't get up again. "What? Boss," he called towards the people who had kicked the little brother as he ran out from behind the counter and towards the two men. Yang Kai quickly helped second brother up whilst intently glaring at the two evil-faced men. One of the men, looked pale and thin, was clutching his stomach, while the other one was built like a bear, supported the pale one. These two were the ones who kicked down the second brother. "Who's the boss here?" the man people shouted out. I am. Boss," he quickly replied. He was only an ordinary merchant, yet the two men who called him out had such fierce-looking faces. The swords at their waist and the fierce faces that showed they were not easily trifled with. "Boss," he wondered what had happened. Well, so you are the black-hearted boss. You even dare to sell poisonous rice to my brother. Look at him. Originally he was a strong man, but after eating your rice he became this sick. Normally he is as strong as a bear, but he can hardly stand now. You black-hearted person, worrying only about money and going as far as to take lives." At this outburst from the man, boss, he worriedly stammered out, "How could this be? How could it?" The man then said, "How would I know? This morning my brother bought some rice from you, and made rice porridge, then he became like this after eating the rice he bought from you. I was lucky I didn't eat any, otherwise I also would have become like him." Bossy's forehead began to sweat. He took his sleeves and kept wiping his forehead and said, "Respected customer, I fear there might be a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding? Misunderstanding your mother. If it wasn't for your rice, then what caused him to become like this?" the Han man roared. Yang Kai sat down and pondered the situation while all eyes were on the commotion. Boss, he is such a nice person. Yang Kai couldn't believe that this person who gave him rice would put poison in it. Not to mention the fact boss, he couldn't possibly have a black heart in Yang Kai's mind. A black-hearted businessman wouldn't be so stupid as to poison his own rice. If these information spread, how would he do business in the future? Who would dare come and buy his rice? The two men's poor excuses were really unbearable, and they couldn't even consider that it was something else. Therefore, these two are definitely here to ruin others. But this move was a bit too evil, for they implied that the boss needed someone to die just to earn some money. Even though Yang Kai's body was weak, he was still a practitioner. And through these past years he had seen countless types of people, so he felt he could accurately judge Boss He. The man was also someone who he owed greatly, and when Yang Kai witnessed this, it caused his face to fall. He stood up and said, "These two." "What?" One of the men threw him a glare, his anger evident. Yang Kai didn't speak, but Boss He immediately sprang in front of him. He slowly shook his head for Yang Kai to stop. "Uncle He." Yang Kai was stunned. "Even in bankruptcy, avoid misfortunes," Boss He whispered. Yang Kai just helplessly sighed. That fact that the boss said this signaled that he knew what the two Han men were on about. But in order to do business, one must have a good name. The earlier commotion had already attracted a lot of attention. If this continued, then the rice stand's reputation would go down the drain. Even if one knew what they said was false, one could only comply with them and hurriedly hope to end this fiasco before too much damage was done. In desperation, Boss He faced the man. "Regarding your brother's illness, all I can say is that it has nothing to do with me." After the two men heard this, one cried out in anger, "Even if it's not related, I have already come to this rice stand. If I don't make the truth clear, then my brother's suffering would be in vain. He should be sent to the doctor immediately. But of course, if you are willing to shoulder the medical bills, then we are willing to drop the subject." After this statement, it was clear that they really wished for Boss He to go bankrupt to avoid misfortunes. If people really wanted to extort money, they would do it over a period of time. The demands that these two men were making were too short-sighted. If Boss He agreed to pay them off now, his rice stand's reputation would still suffer. For nothing is watertight, and news of him selling poisoned rice would spread. This told Yang Kai that the men were either not interested in extorting Boss He for more money, or that they had some other goal. Who would have imagined that these two Han men had no intention of compromising? "You black-hearted boss. Who do you think we two brothers are, to be exploited by you so freely? We two brothers were really unlucky to have bought poisoned rice from you. Where is your guilty conscience?" That statement resonated quite deeply with Yang Kai. He curled his lip while sitting, thinking, "Then are you the virtuous one? Living life clear from any conscience?" Boss He was also stupefied. What? Weren't these two men here to extort money? While stunned and unsure what to do, more and more people had started to gather. A handsome boy similar to Yang Kai's age had also appeared. From his looks, he was clearly far better off than Yang Kai. That young man casually walked up to the men, and circled them with interest. Whilst doing so, he constantly clicked his tongue. Others may have not noticed, but with a glance Yang Kai recognized those three as the people he spotted earlier in the alley. The crowd just stared at the boy, who had just appeared. Weren't these three men together? Yang Kai sensed an evil plot in the air.